for pause. Let the process take its course. But no, that wasn't enough. We had to make demands. We want justice now. And if we don't get it now and we don't get it our way, we're going to start saying things and doing things until we get it our way. It's not about the right thing. It's not about justice. And it's not about the process. It's about what we want and what we want now. And we don't care who we disparage in the process. This isn't about race. Not a single witness has said up to this day that there was one racial slur uttered during the course of these events. And unfortunately, a life was lost. But you want to know something, folks? 2 people engaged in bad behavior that day. Why? I don't know. But they did. And we're going to criticize everybody else for just letting the process take the course.
Tell us how you really feel. That was the sheriff with some strong comments there. His name is Newell Normand. After of course, Joe McKnight was shot and killed, the NFL player. So he fired back at the people who have criticized him for the way he's handled the Joe McKnight shooting investigation. Stephen A., I want to start with you here. What's your reaction to what you just heard?
Well, my first reaction is that to Sheriff Norman, I would love to talk to this man privately, one-on-one, and have a conversation with him. Because I would want him to understand that just because somebody, no one rather, uttered a racial slur or anything like that doesn't mean that it didn't have something to do with it. Joe McKnight was shot dead. He was unarmed. And as a result of that, this man who shot him was initially brought to the police station, questioned, then let go. We understand that now he has been arrested for manslaughter. We get that. But when you have people sending in emails and text messages and beyond, what they're saying is a man was gunned down in the streets in broad daylight. You have the assailant who acknowledged he shot the guy, who admitted the individual was not armed. So why is this man dead? And if you want to sit up there and say that it's not about race or whatever the case may be, that's fine. I can respect where the sheriff is coming from because he's like, we need time to gather evidence. You might need time to gather evidence in your eyes. But in the eyes of the common individual out there, an unarmed man was gunned down in broad daylight over road rage, and the assailant is there waiting for you, hands you his gun, told you he shot the dude, and you questioned him and sent him home. Now, we might have stand your ground laws and other things to take into consideration, but one would surmise, why the hell did you let him leave after questioning him? He told you he shot the dude. The dude is dead, and you let him go home. I don't give a damn if it was for an hour. What you let him go home for? What did you want him to do? Go home and cook himself dinner and chill and watch an episode of General Hospital? I mean, what the hell was that about? So when you look at it from that perspective, of course people are going to take it the wrong way. And then when you couple that with the times that we have been living in, particularly over the last few years, the protests, Black Lives Matter, black individuals getting shot down. It's not just about police brutality or the specter of police brutality. George Zimmerman, when he shot Trayvon Martin, that wasn't a cop. It wasn't a cop. There are people who Will Smith and his situation in New Orleans, if I remember correctly, it wasn't a cop who shot him. But what we're saying is other people get into situations and somehow, some way, there are arrests, there are confrontations, there are questions and all of this other stuff. But when black men get into situations, they're dead. Now, that might not be a racial issue to Sheriff Norman. I would love to have a private, off the record, off the air conversation with him to explain to him why he is wrong. Period.
Yeah, from his point of view, I understand what he means when he says this was not a racial issue and that it wasn't a hate crime. It wasn't about race, the confrontation. It was simply an issue of road rage. It's very difficult. I'd say it's impossible to completely divorce law enforcement and the issue of race, particularly in situations like this. There is someone who is dead, and it was a black man shot and killed at the hands of a white man. I would say that the history of this country has tied race to class. This is not new ground here. This has been discussed and written about for generations now. Has tied race to class in a way where there are clearly second-class citizens based on race. Now, if a member of law enforcement, in this case, this man feels that that's outrageous, they're following the same procedures, etc., that they would otherwise had the race been reversed, had it been a black man who shot and killed a white man, I would ask those listening to perform that thought experiment in your own mind. Had it been a black man who shot and killed a white man, would it take 4 days to lock him up? Especially if you knew where he was and you brought him in for questioning. And once you do that thought experiment, I think the answer becomes pretty obvious. Now, maybe there are law enforcement people who say, no, were it me, were I in charge of the case, I would treat it exactly the same way, regardless of race. But that's not the way it seems to most people, and that hasn't been the history of our country. So to stand up there and say that you can completely divorce race from an incident like this, I think is at best naive.
Well, a couple of things that I'd like to point out, Max, and I'd appreciate your input on what I'm about to say. First of all, by letting the guy go after questioning him, you've essentially allowed him to go home and get his affairs in order. Hire your lawyer, get your family together, do whatever it is that you need to do to prepare yourself for the onslaught that would come about. I am telling you, as an individual who is from the streets of New York City, who grew up with drug dealers on my block, who knows the streets, who understands it, I'm trying to tell you, that just does not happen for black people. Let me be very, very clear. I have law enforcement officials in my family. I've got 2 of my boys. One's a DEA agent, one's FBI. I got a couple of police officers that are my boys as well. And I ain't just grow up with hood rats. I grew up with hood rats that turned into something special. You understand what I'm saying? I'm telling you what they tell me. That doesn't happen for black people on most occasions. That's number one. But the other point, Max, that I would like to articulate about this to Sheriff Norman, and again, I'm disagreeing with him, but I'm not condemning him because I understand that on his side of the fence, I can hear where he's coming from, which is why I said I'd love to have a conversation with them. As it pertains to Sheriff Norman, I got a solution to some of the things that he was talking about. Can you show us incidences where road rage occurs with white people and they're getting gunned down in the streets? And oh, by the way, people are allowed to go home after questioning when they already told you they shot the person down. If we had, I'm not saying that there are not white victims. What I'm saying is that if white victims were more conspicuous and we saw that on the news and blowing up the headlines and beyond, maybe the specter of something heinous would not be overwhelming us the way that it is. But when we see deaths, I'm not talking about arrests, I'm not talking about fights, when we see fatalities in situations like this, it is black men who are dying. And that's undeniable. It's undeniable.
I would say this. You want my input on that idea. I would say you're essentially talking about the idea of white privilege. And to my point about how class is tied to race due to the history of this country, and how we've created an idea that there are second-class citizens, African-American, essentially, in these incidents, equals a second-class citizen in terms of the way, in terms of treatment by law enforcement, and certainly at least in terms of the way it's perceived by many, if not most. I would say that my issue with the idea of white privilege is not to strip people, white people, of that privilege. It's to create a place where it's not a privilege, it's a human right. The human right to dignity and to be treated like a first-class citizen should extend to everyone. not be stripped from one group of people so that they are now on par with another, but that so-called privilege, which it is because it is conferred only to one group of people, is extended to everybody.
All right, but last comment. Joe Madison, Urban View Radio, Channel 126 on Sirius XM every weekday morning from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., religiously states cultural conditioning. What we're talking about here, and the media is very responsible for this, is this perception that has been disseminated for decades and beyond that somehow black men are animalistic, somehow black men are a danger, they are a problem, and they are to be mowed down. It may not be the intention of the present day media, but the actions spanning decades have culminated to a point when it comes to black men, a legitimate argument can be made that while others can talk and there can be a negotiation, black folks, black men have to be gunned down. It is undeniable when stuff like this happens. That's right, I said it for people out there that wondering just in case they thought I stuttered. It's something different going on. Cultural conditioning.
No question. And a young man was killed because of road rage. It's so, I don't even have the words of what to say here about Joe McKnight, but my heart goes out to his family, all his loved ones. And another one of these stories that we have to get into. I appreciate your words on that, Stephen A. But you have a perfect segue for me, Stephen A. Let's get into our next subject here. 3 days after Cam Newton was benched by Ron Rivera for a dress code violation, there are conflicting reports on why Newton was punished. Barstool Sports is reporting he was benched for being at a club past curfew in between games on the West Coast and not for failing to wear a tie on game day. And then you mentioned the Cowboys. On Monday night, Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott celebrated the Cowboys' 11-1 start, popping some champagne in the club in Dallas. So I want to start with you, Stephen A. here. Is it okay for athletes to be in clubs?
Max, Molly, this is the most difficult question that I've ever had to answer because Max, my man who used to sit in that chair, my brother from another mother, Skip, once made me laugh so hard, they almost had to call the paramedics because I was laughing so hard because he actually said that professional athletes should literally have a curfew and shouldn't be out after 11 o'clock at night, which I thought was the most ridiculous statement that I've ever heard. He always said that. Here's my thing. I'm not so sure I disagree that much in this day and age. Now, I'm not about to sit up there and go that far and talk about curfews and things of that nature for grown men who know what their responsibilities are. But I will concede that times have truly changed. That the world that we live in, with everybody having cameras on their cell phones, with Twitter and the advent of other social media outlets, and how perception can become reality even when there's no truth attached to it whatsoever. And the damage that it can do to a lot of these guys. I would never say, don't go out. I would never say you should have a curfew and as a grown man, you should be prohibited from hanging if that's what you choose to do, so long as it's not in violation of any team rules. But what I will say is that I believe the time has arrived where the world is so wide open. I do find myself, even me personally, asking, is it truly, truly worth it? Max, I'm at a point, man, I'll go out to dinner. You know, I'll take my girl, you know, we go out, we'll do whatever, you know, jazz club or something. But I got to confess to you, man, ain't no desire to go out no more because it just doesn't appear to be worth it. And I'm a grown man who has a 2-drink maximum, has never been in any kind of trouble, and ain't about to get in any kind of trouble, okay, from a legal variety, that is. Legal, I'm talking about legal issues, that's what I'm talking about. I ain't gonna get in no trouble like that. My point is that it just ain't worth it. And I do think it's come a time where these guys got to start looking at it and asking themselves just that.
Listen, I'm old enough to have been in the transition from pre-social media to social media era. as someone who was on TV and had some disposable income as a young man, and I can tell you my experience of it is precisely as you described, that it's more dangerous even just to go out just on the optics alone, the way it looks, because everyone has recording devices. And if you're recorded in a moment that is even taken out of context, looks bad, it can be very bad. What social media has done, and camera phones, it's taken backroom issues and behavior. The behavior, we've always had culturally an understanding, at least implicitly, that the way we behave in public is not always the way we behave in private. And social media and camera phones has taken that kind of private backroom behavior and brought it to the front room. And there's this insistence somehow now that those two things have to align more closely, or you're being hypocritical or you're really behaving bad. I would say in the case of athletes going to clubs, that's a major consideration. You're right. They should weigh whether it's worth it or not. I would also say that a lot of the athletes that people think are choir boys, including some of the quarterbacks with big endorsement deals throughout even recent history, go out and party like everybody else. But here are the two things you have to do if you're going to do that. One, don't get caught, which is very, very difficult. I mean, if you go out a lot, eventually you would assume you will. And by caught, I don't mean necessarily doing anything bad, just out of context where it looks bad. And two, win. Because if you're Dak Prescott, or Ezekiel Elliott, if you are Cam Newton, and you're at the club and they got pictures of you on TMZ, wherever, and you're winning, hey, that's fine. But if you're in the middle of a bad season or you blow it in the big moment, you will be blamed for that. So athletes just need to go in with their eyes open. Try to be careful in terms of your own image and win.
Stephen A., can I add something here really quick? Because we have to be real. People are going to go out, right? People need to let their hair down after a big win. You want to celebrate. People need to enjoy life as well. My former colleague, Terrell Davis, used to always say, from NFL Network, he used to always say, bring the party to you. These guys have huge houses. Bring everybody over. And there's one other thing I want to add, because I know you both respect Derek Jeter so much. Pull a Jeter. Leave the phones at the door. Or wait till after you retire to get married, start your family. I'm just saying.
Not everyone has those kind of resources, Molly. A place big enough and the wherewithal and the cachet to get the whole party to them and then have everyone have their cell phones confiscated.
You can be more private.
Hold on. Yes. I mean, this is one of the areas where I would consider myself an expert on this. Number one, if you can afford it, have the party at your crib.
Yes.
Number two, it's not just social media. It's not just carrying cell phones. It's also TMZ, who's a formidable, entity in terms of what we're discussing. I mean, my Lord, I come off the plane and they're waiting for me sometimes. I mean, it's unbelievable. So and that's me. I ain't one of these athletes. So you got that going on. Let's also take into account the fact that, if you're gonna go out, don't tell me you can't afford a car service. Yes, you can. And not only that, whether it's your boy or a crew of dudes or whatever, you've got to be insulated with individuals responsible enough, and more importantly, who love you enough to not think about themselves, but think about you and care enough to make sure that you're not doing anything that would compromise you or your profession. Personally, it would be best that they don't do anything during the season. But whether it's during the season or not, the company you keep is paramount.
Of course.
It's pivotal.
There's a lot of vultures out there.
You have to have the right people around you.
You bring up TMZ, and TMZ does a fantastic job. They will catch you slipping.
They do.
They will catch you slipping. But
no question.
Forget about TMZ. What about all the other sites and all the other entities that won't even catch you slipping? They'll just make it look like you are. I mean, it's dangerous
they lie all the time.
They
lie all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No question. And it's dangerous. It's not just about them. It's the other people, all the snakes that are out there trying to get them, knowing they have money as well.